The house always felt safest after midnight. Not silent, but settled. The refrigerator hummed softly in the kitchen. The heater clicked once, then rested. Streetlights outside painted warm amber lines across the living room wall. And on the couch, under a knitted gray blanket, Sarah slept. At the foot of the sofa, Milo lay curled into himself. Golden fur rising and falling. Slow breath. Peaceful. The digital clock on the stove shifted from 1:59 to 2 o'clock. And right on cue, Milo's eyes opened. Not startled. Not confused. Aware. He lifted his head slowly, ears twitching as if catching a distant sound that didn't quite belong to the room. For a moment, he simply listened. Then he stood. Gentle. Unhurried. His paws made soft whispers against the hardwood floor as he walked toward the front door. He didn't look back. He didn't hesitate. He sat. Perfectly straight. Facing the door. The moonlight touched his fur, turning gold into silver. And then he howled. Low. Long. Not loud enough to alarm, but deep enough to stir something in the chest. On the couch, Sarah shifted beneath her blanket. Milo, she murmured sleepily. The howl faded into the quiet house. Then another came, softer this time. Almost aching. Sarah pushed herself upright, rubbing her eyes. She glanced toward the clock. 2:01 a.m. Again. She sighed gently and swung her legs off the couch. Milo, buddy, what is it? Her voice wasn't annoyed. Just tired. She patted across the living room, the floor cool beneath her feet. The house smelled faintly of lavender from the diffuser she'd left running. Milo didn't move when she approached. He didn't wag. He didn't bark. He just kept staring at the door. As if someone stood on the other side. Waiting. Sarah crouched beside him, placing her palm against his back. His fur was warm. Steady. His breathing calm. You hear something? She whispered. His ears twitched. But he didn't look at her. Another soft howl slipped from his chest. Not wild. Not desperate. Just longing. Sarah leaned closer to the door and listened. Nothing. No cars passing. No footsteps on the sidewalk. No wind pressing against the porch. Only quiet. She unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door slowly. The night air drifted in, cool and still. The street was empty. Porch lights off. Houses dark. She stepped outside, wrapping her arms around herself. Milo, there's nothing out here. Behind her, he remained seated inside the doorway. Watching. The way he always did. Because this wasn't the first time. It had been 3 nights in a row now. Exactly 2 a.m. Exactly this spot. Exactly that same low, heart-pulling howl. The first night, she thought it was a coincidence. The second night, maybe a passing siren far away. But tonight felt intentional. She stepped back inside and closed the door softly. The latch clicked into place. Milo finally turned his head toward her. His eyes weren't anxious. They weren't afraid. They were focused. Almost thoughtful. What is it, boy? She asked again, kneeling beside him. He blinked slowly. Then looked back at the door. And waited. They stayed like that for nearly a minute. No sound. No movement. Just the two of them, sitting in the glow of moonlight and kitchen clock numbers. Eventually, Milo stood. Walked back to his spot near the couch. And lay down. Ritual complete. Sarah remained kneeling by the door long after he settled. Her chest felt tight, not with fear, but with something else. Curiosity. Because Milo wasn't acting restless. He wasn't scratching or pacing. He wasn't asking to go outside. He was honoring something. She finally returned to the couch, but she didn't lie down. Instead, she watched him. He closed his eyes slowly, as if satisfied. As if he had done exactly what he meant to do. The next night, Sarah didn't fall asleep right away. She turned off the television earlier than usual. Made chamomile tea. Dimmed the lights. At 1:55 a.m., she sat upright on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders. Waiting. Milo slept at her feet. Peaceful. At 1:59, he stirred. Before the clock even changed. His head lifted. Ears alert. Then. 2 o'clock. He stood. Walked to the door. Saturday. The same measured steps. The same posture. The same direction of his gaze. Sarah didn't move this time. She just watched. Her heart beating slightly faster. He lifted his head. And howled. It was softer tonight. But clearer. A single note that lingered in the air like the final chord of a piano song. Sarah swallowed. There was something in it. Not sadness exactly. Not pain. Memory. She rose slowly and walked to him. Instead of opening the door, she sat beside him on the floor. The wood felt cool through her pajama pants. She leaned her shoulder lightly against his side. "I'm right here," she whispered. Milo's howl faded. He didn't look at her. But his body leaned just slightly into her touch. And they stayed like that. Two silhouettes by the door. Listening to a night that offered no answers. After a minute, he exhaled. Stood. And returned to bed. Again. Like clockwork. Sarah didn't sleep for a long time after that. She stared at the ceiling. Thinking. Milo had lived in this house since he was 8 weeks old. He knew every sound. Every routine. Every neighbor. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. The next morning, she checked the security app on her phone. Scrolled back to 2 a.m. Nothing. No motion detected. No headlights passing. Just Milo sitting in frame. Still. Focused. Waiting. For what? 3 more nights passed. Each one identical. And with each repetition, the mystery softened instead of intensified. It felt less like a problem. And more like a message. On the 6th night, Sarah brought a pillow to the door before midnight. If this was going to happen again, she would meet it calmly. At 1:59, Milo stirred. She watched the shift happen in real time. A quiet awakening. As if an internal alarm gently rang inside him. 2 o'clock. He rose. Saturday. Lifted his head. And howled. But tonight. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. Because in the stillness, she felt something. Not outside the house, but inside her own chest. A memory brushing against the edges of her mind. Something connected to that time. To that door. To that exact direction Milo faced. She placed her hand over her heart. "Why 2 a.m.?" she whispered. Milo lowered his head slowly. The howl faded into silence. He didn't move away this time. He stayed seated longer than usual. As if waiting for her to understand. And for the first time, Sarah wasn't confused. She was close. Very close. Because what Milo sensed every night at 2 a.m. wasn't outside the door. It was something that once walked through it. And the meaning behind his quiet ritual had a truth no one expected. The next morning felt different. Not heavier. Just thoughtful. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, soft and golden. It touched the wooden table where Sarah sat with her coffee, steam rising slowly into the air. Milo lay near the back door, head resting on his paws. Peaceful. As if 2 a.m. had never happened. Sarah studied him quietly. "You sleep fine the rest of the night," she murmured. His tail thumped once against the floor. Normal. Happy. Steady. That was the part that puzzled her most. There was no anxiety in him. No pacing. No whining during the day. Only that single, deliberate moment in the dark. She replayed it in her mind. The way he rose before the clock changed. The way he walked, not rushed. The way he sat. Perfect posture. Focused. Connected. It didn't look like confusion. It looked like intention. That afternoon, Sarah decided not to search for answers online. No articles. No forums. No quick explanations. This didn't feel medical. It didn't feel behavioral. It felt emotional. She opened the hall closet and pulled out an old photo album instead. Dust drifted softly as she placed it on the table. Milo lifted his head, watching her. Curious. She flipped through pages slowly. Birthday candles. Christmas mornings. Summer barbecues in the backyard. Milo appeared in nearly every photo. Growing from a small golden ball of fluff into the calm, steady dog he was now. Then she paused. A picture near the middle. The front door. Nighttime. Her father standing in the doorway, still in his work jacket, smiling tiredly. And beside him, a younger Milo. Sitting. Waiting. Sarah blinked. Her chest tightened gently. She turned the page. Another photo. Her father crouched down at the door, petting Milo's head. The timestamp printed in the corner read 2:07 a.m. Her breath caught. 2 a.m. Her father had worked night shifts at the hospital for years. He always came home around that time. And Milo had always waited. That night, Sarah didn't just wait. She prepared. She dimmed the lights early. Turned off her phone. Left the house in quiet. At 1:58 a.m., she was already sitting by the door. Milo slept near the couch. Still. Calm. Then, without alarm, his eyes opened. He didn't stretch. Didn't yawn. He simply rose. As if responding to something internal. Something remembered. He walked to the door. Saturday. Facing forward. Sarah's heart beat softly in her ears. "Is this about Grandpa?" she whispered. Milo's ears twitched. 2 o'clock. He lifted his head. And howled. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It sounded familiar. Like a greeting stretched across time. Sarah closed her eyes. And suddenly, she could see it. Her father unlocking the door quietly so he wouldn't wake her. Milo waiting faithfully, tail sweeping the floor. That soft reunion every night. Man and dog. Exhausted but together. The ritual. The routine. The love. Tears slid down Sarah's cheeks. "He used to come home now," she whispered. Milo lowered his head slightly. But he didn't move away. He stayed seated. as if honoring something sacred. Sarah placed her palm against the door. It was cool. Solid. Still. No one stood on the other side. And yet, the moment felt full. Not empty. Milo let out one more soft note. Shorter this time. Gentler. Then he exhaled. And rested his chin near the door. Not restless. Not confused. Remembering. They stayed like that longer than usual. Two silhouettes in moonlight. Breathing in rhythm. Sarah finally understood something important. Milo wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't searching. He wasn't expecting the door to open. He was acknowledging. The way humans light candles. The way we pause at anniversaries. The way we whisper names into quiet rooms. Dogs remember too. Not in words. But in feelings. In time. In patterns of love. When Milo finally stood, he didn't walk away immediately. He looked at her. Directly. His eyes soft. Connected. And for the first time, she didn't ask why. She nodded slowly. I remember too, she said. His tail moved gently once. Then he returned to his bed. Peaceful again. The following morning felt lighter. Not because the mystery was solved completely, but because it had shape now. Meaning. Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee out of habit. Then paused. Smiled sadly. And poured one back into the sink. Milo watched from across the room. She walked over and knelt beside him. You waited for him every night, didn't you? His head tilted slightly. She stroked his golden fur. You're still waiting. Not out of confusion. Not out of loss. But out of love. That night, she didn't sit by the door in silence. She brought something with her. A framed photo. The one of her father crouching beside Milo. She placed it gently on the hallway table near the door. At 1:59, Milo stirred. At 2 o'clock, he rose. Saturday. Faced the door. And howled. But tonight, the sound felt different. Not aching. Not heavy. Just steady. Sarah placed her hand over the photo frame. I think he'd like that you still remember, she whispered. Milo's posture softened. His head lowered slowly after the final note. And in the quiet that followed, there was no tension. Only warmth. The ritual was no longer a mystery to solve. It was a memory to share. And Sarah knew something now with certainty. Milo wasn't calling out to the night. He was keeping a promise. After that night, something shifted inside the house. Not the furniture. Not the routine. But the feeling. The mystery was no longer sharp. It was soft now. Gentle. Almost sacred. Sarah moved through her days differently. She noticed the quiet spaces more. The way afternoon light rested on the hallway wall. The way Milo followed her from room to room, never far, never loud. He had always been steady. But now, she watched him more closely. Not searching for problems. Searching for meaning. That afternoon, she sat on the living room floor with a small cardboard box beside her. Inside were her father's old things. A watch. A folded hospital badge. A wool scarf that still carried the faintest trace of his cologne. Milo approached slowly. Careful. Curious. He lowered his nose to the edge of the box. Sniffed. Paused. Then gently placed his chin on the rim. Sarah swallowed. You remember this, don't you? She whispered. His tail moved once against the rug. Slow. Thoughtful. She lifted the scarf and held it out. Milo leaned forward, inhaling deeply. Not excited. Not restless. Just aware. He sat down in front of her. Eyes soft. There was no confusion in him. Only recognition. That evening, Sarah made a quiet decision. Instead of treating 2 a.m. like something strange, she would treat it like something intentional. A moment. A memory. A bridge. At 1:50 a.m., she turned off the television early. Left the hallway light on warm and low. Placed her father's photo gently on the small table near the door. And sat down beside it. Milo slept on the couch at first. Breathing evenly. Peaceful. At 1:58, he stirred. Not abruptly. Just a subtle shift. As if something inside him whispered. It's time. Sarah watched carefully. He stood. Walked to the door. Saturday. But tonight. He didn't howl immediately. He looked at the photo first. Just for a second. Then lifted his head. 2 o'clock. The howl rose into the quiet house. Low. Steady. Less longing now. More honoring. Sarah closed her eyes. She could almost hear the faint echo of keys turning in the lock. Her father's tired footsteps. The soft greeting he used to give. Hey there, buddy. Milo's howl faded gently. He lowered his head. But instead of turning away, he stayed seated. Waiting. Sarah placed her hand against the door. You used to run to him, she whispered softly. Milo's ears twitched. You'd sit right here. Her voice broke slightly, but not with pain. With tenderness. He'd scratch behind your ears before he even took off his shoes. Milo shifted closer to her, leaning his shoulder against her leg. And in that moment, it didn't feel like they were alone. Not in a supernatural way. Not in fear. Just in memory. The house felt full. Full of echoes. Full of love that had once lived inside these walls. After a minute, Milo did something new. Instead of walking back to his bed immediately, he looked at her. Held her gaze. His eyes deep and warm. As if asking a quiet question. Are you ready? Sarah took a slow breath. I think I understand now, she said. Her voice was steady. You're not waiting for him to come back. Milo blinked slowly. You're remembering that he came home. The difference settled softly between them. Waiting holds tension. Remembering holds gratitude. Milo's tail tapped gently against the floor. 1, 2, slow beats. Then he stood and returned to the couch. Ritual complete. But different. Lighter. The next morning, Sarah didn't wake up tired. She felt peaceful. Like something unfinished had gently closed. She brewed her coffee and opened the front door briefly, letting morning air drift inside. The same door. The same frame. But now it carried meaning instead of mystery. Milo stood beside her, gazing out at the quiet street. No tension. No searching. Just stillness. You kept his routine alive, she said softly. Milo looked up at her. And now I will too. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. That night, she added something small to the ritual. At 1:59, as Milo stirred, she placed her hand over her heart. A silent thank you. 2 o'clock. He walked. Saturday. Howled. But this time, She whispered something into the quiet. "Welcome home." The words felt right. Simple. Warm. The howl softened into a hum-like note. And then it ended. No lingering ache. No unfinished feeling. Milo rested his head briefly against her knee. A small gesture. But intentional. Then he returned to sleep. Days passed. And the ritual continued. But it no longer felt like a mystery unfolding. It felt like a shared promise. Sarah realized something important. Dogs don't measure time the way humans do. They measure presence. Connection. Patterns of love. 2 a.m. wasn't just a time. It was a memory carved into Milo's heart. And instead of trying to stop it, she chose to sit beside it. Honor it. Let it breathe. Because sometimes, the things that wake us in the night aren't meant to disturb us. They're meant to remind us. And as Sarah watched Milo settle peacefully at the foot of the couch that evening, she understood something deeper than before. This wasn't about loss. It was about loyalty. A devotion so steady. It kept showing up at the same hour. Every night. And now, she was part of it too. The ritual no longer startled the night. It completed it. By the end of the week, 2 a.m. had become something gentle in the house. Not an interruption. A pause. A sacred breath between yesterday and tomorrow. Sarah adjusted her evenings around it without even realizing. She drank less coffee after sunset. Turned off bright lights earlier. Let the house soften into warm shadows. Milo seemed calmer too. Lighter during the day. He followed her into the kitchen that afternoon, tail swaying slowly as she chopped vegetables for dinner. "You've always known more than I thought," she said quietly. He sat beside her. Watching. Present. That evening, rain tapped lightly against the windows. Not heavy. Just steady enough to create a rhythm. The kind of rain that makes a house feel smaller. Safer. Sarah lit a small candle near the hallway table. Not dramatic. Just warm. Its glow reflected gently in the glass frame holding her father's photo. Milo lay on the rug nearby. Eyes half closed. At 1:57, the rain slowed. At 1:58, Milo opened his eyes. At 1:59, he stood. He didn't rush. Didn't hesitate. He walked to the door with the same steady grace. Sarah joined him before the clock changed. She didn't wait this time. She already knew. 2 o'clock. Milo lifted his head. And howled. The sound blended with the fading rain. It felt less like calling now. And more like remembering out loud. Sarah rested her shoulder gently against the door. "He used to shake the rain off right here," she whispered. Milo's ears flicked slightly. He'd laugh and say, "Long night, but we made it." Her voice carried warmth instead of ache. The howl ended softly. No echo. No strain. Just a breath released into the dark. Milo didn't turn away immediately. He looked at the photo again. Then slowly leaned into Sarah's leg. She wrapped an arm around his neck. They stayed that way longer than usual. The rain stopped completely. The house felt full. Not of sound, but of presence. Over the next few nights, something new began to happen. Milo's howls grew shorter. Not weaker. Just complete. Like he no longer needed to hold the note as long. As if something inside him felt acknowledged. One night, instead of howling right at 2 o'clock, he hesitated. Just a few seconds. Sarah noticed immediately. She smiled softly. "You waiting for me?" she asked. She placed her hand gently over the photo frame. 201. Milo gave a single, gentle howl. Then lowered his head. Ritual complete. But now shared. It was no longer just his memory. It was theirs. During the day, Sarah found herself talking about her father more freely. Not in heavy tones, but in stories. Small ones. Like how he always kept peppermint candies in his coat pocket. Or how he used to hum old jazz songs while making coffee. Milo would sit nearby when she spoke. Listening. Head tilted slightly. As if cataloging every word. One afternoon, she sat on the front porch steps with Milo beside her. The sun was setting in soft orange waves across the street. "You know," she said quietly, "I think you kept me from forgetting." Milo rested his chin on her knee. She ran her fingers through his fur. When he stopped coming home, everything felt unfinished. The words came easier now. "But you never stopped showing up." Milo's tail brushed gently against the porch wood. Slow. Steady. Loyal. That night, something unexpected happened. At 1:59, Milo stirred as usual. But instead of walking straight to the door, he paused. Looked back at Sarah. She was already standing. Already moving toward him. Together, they walked the few steps. Side by side. 2:00. He didn't sit immediately. He waited until she did. Then he lowered himself beside her. And when he howled, it was softer than ever. More breath than sound. Almost like a whisper. Sarah closed her eyes. And instead of seeing her father arriving home tired, she imagined him smiling. Watching. Grateful. The howl ended quickly. Milo didn't linger. He nudged her hand gently. As if to say, "It's okay now." She laughed softly through a tear. "You're teaching me how to let go without forgetting." He blinked slowly. Then stood. Walked back to his bed. Settled. The house felt different after that night. Lighter. Not because the memory faded, but because it no longer carried weight. It carried warmth. 2 a.m. wasn't a reminder of absence anymore. It was a reminder of love that had existed fully. And still did. Just differently. Sarah turned off the hallway light before going to bed. For the first time since the ritual began. The candle remained unlit. The photo stayed in place. But something had shifted. The need to hold the moment tightly was gone. Because the connection was no longer fragile. It was steady. Like Milo. Like loyalty that doesn't demand attention. Just presence. The next night, 2:00 came quietly. Milo stirred. Walked. Saturday. Howled. Short. Gentle. Complete. Sarah didn't whisper anything this time. She didn't need to. She simply placed her hand on his back. Warm fur. Steady breath. And in the silence that followed, there was no question left. No mystery unresolved. Only a bond deepened in the quiet hours of the night. A dog who remembered. A daughter who learned to remember too. And a ritual that began as a puzzle, but became a bridge. By now, 2 a.m. no longer surprised the house. It belonged there. Like the soft hum of the refrigerator. Like the ticking clock above the stove. It had become part of the rhythm. But even with understanding, Sarah felt there was one more layer. Something gentle still waiting to unfold. One quiet afternoon, she climbed the small step ladder in the hallway closet. On the top shelf sat an old storage bin. Clear plastic. Slightly cracked at the corners. She brought it down carefully and set it on the living room floor. Milo watched from the couch. Alert. Curious. She lifted the lid slowly. Inside were small pieces of the past. Old mail. A leather keychain. Her father's night shift schedule sheets, folded neatly. She picked one up. The paper had yellowed slightly. Dates lined the page. Times printed clearly beside each shift. 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. She froze. 2 a.m. That wasn't just when he arrived home. It was when his shift officially ended. The exact minute he clocked out. The exact minute he walked toward the parking lot. Toward his car. Toward home. Sarah's throat tightened. Milo, she whispered softly. He jumped down from the couch and patted over. She placed the paper gently in front of him. He sniffed it once, then sat beside her. Still. Calm. As if he already knew. That evening, Sarah didn't light a candle. She didn't bring out the photo. Instead, she held the folded schedule in her hands as she waited near the door. At 1:58, Milo stirred. At 1:59, he stood. But tonight, he walked slower, more thoughtful, as if sensing the weight of the moment. He sat facing the door. Sarah sat beside him, holding the paper against her chest. 2 o'clock. He lifted his head and howled. The sound was steady, clear, but not long, not stretched. It felt like a signal, a marker, a moment stamped in time. Sarah closed her eyes. And suddenly, she didn't imagine her father inside the house. She imagined him leaving the hospital, walking through quiet corridors. Nurses nodding goodnight. Doors closing softly. The end of a long shift. 2 a.m. The moment between work and home. Between exhaustion and rest. The moment Milo had learned to expect. Not the arrival. The transition. She opened her eyes slowly. You weren't waiting for him at the door, she said softly. Milo lowered his head slightly. You were marking the moment he left. The realization felt gentle. Almost tender. He hadn't been calling someone home. He had been honoring the exact minute someone began the journey. A quiet act of loyalty. A dog keeping track of time long after humans stopped counting. The howl faded. Milo remained seated longer than usual. Sarah leaned her head lightly against the door. You always knew when it was time, she whispered. Her father had once joked about it. How Milo would perk up minutes before his shift ended. Even without alarms. Even without phone calls. Dogs feel patterns. They memorize love through repetition. And Milo had memorized 2 a.m. Not as absence, but as devotion. The next few nights felt different again. Lighter. More complete. Milo still rose at 2. Still walked. Still sat. But the howl shortened naturally. Some nights, it was barely more than a soft note. Other nights, it sounded almost like a sigh. Sarah no longer waited for meaning. She sat because she wanted to. Not to solve something, but to share it. One night, as Milo settled after his brief howl, he didn't immediately return to his bed. Instead, he nudged her hand gently. She looked down at him. What is it? He turned not toward the door this time, but toward the hallway. Toward the living room. Toward the rest of the house. She understood slowly. He wasn't holding onto the doorway anymore. He was ready to move forward. The following day, Sarah made a small change. She moved the framed photo from the hallway table to the living room bookshelf. Not hidden. Not removed. Just relocated. Integrated into daily life. Instead of anchored to a single hour. That night, 2 a.m. came quietly. Milo stirred. Walked. Saturday. But before howling, he glanced toward the living room. Toward the shelf. Toward the photo. Then he gave the softest sound yet. A brief, gentle note. And lowered his head almost immediately. No lingering. No waiting. He stood. And walked back to his bed without pause. Sarah remained seated for a moment longer. Her heart felt calm. Whole. The ritual hadn't disappeared. It had evolved. Like grief turning into gratitude. Like memory turning into story. The next morning, she opened the front door just after sunrise. Golden light spilled into the hallway. Milo stood beside her. Still. Content. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, she said softly. He leaned lightly against her leg. Not because he needed reassurance, but because he offered it. And Sarah finally understood the final piece. Milo hadn't been stuck in the past. He had simply been faithful to it. Faithful to the exact minute love once repeated itself. And now that she saw it fully, he didn't need to hold it as tightly. Because she would remember too. Not at 2 a.m. only. But every day. In sunlight. In stories. In the quiet ways she kept her father present in her life. That night, when 2 a.m. arrived, Milo rose once more. Walked to the door. Saturday. And gave one soft, simple howl. Short. Complete. Peaceful. Then he returned to sleep. And for the first time, Sarah stayed seated only a few seconds after. She smiled gently and whispered into the quiet house. Thank you. Something changed the following week. Not in the house. Not in the clock. But in Milo. On Monday night, 1:59 came quietly. Sarah was already awake. She didn't sit by the door this time. She stayed on the couch. Watching. Waiting without tension. Milo stirred. Lifted his head. Listened. 2 o'clock. He stood. Walked toward the door. But halfway there, he slowed. Paused. Looked back at her. It was small. Subtle. But different. Go on, she whispered gently. He studied her for a moment. Then continued. Saturday. Lifted his head. And howled. The sound was softer than ever before. Almost a breath. Almost a memory dissolving into air. Sarah felt it in her chest. Not heavy. Not sharp. But shifting. The howl ended quickly. Milo remained seated only a few seconds. Then, instead of lingering, he stood and walked straight to her. Not to his bed. To her. He rested his chin on her knee. Looking up. Eyes steady. Present. Not searching the door anymore. Searching her. Sarah's breath caught. Oh, she whispered. She ran her fingers slowly through his fur. You don't need the door now. His tail brushed against the couch once. Gentle. Certain. For weeks, the ritual had faced outward. Toward the street. Toward memory. Toward the place where someone once returned. But tonight, it turned inward. Toward home. Toward the living room. Toward the one person still here. Milo climbed onto the couch beside her, something he rarely did without invitation. He curled close, warm against her side. Sarah wrapped the blanket around both of them. 2:03 a.m. And for the first time in a long while, the house felt completely at rest. The next day, she found herself smiling at unexpected moments. While washing dishes, while folding laundry, while passing the bookshelf where her father's photo now sat naturally among other frames. The ache had transformed fully, not into forgetting, but into warmth. That evening, she took Milo for a longer walk than usual. The neighborhood was quiet. Streetlights glowing softly against early night air. They passed the hospital parking lot at the end of the block, visible just beyond the trees. She hadn't walked that direction in months. Milo slowed as they reached the corner. He didn't pull. He didn't resist. He simply stood, looking toward the distant building. Sarah followed his gaze. The windows shimmered faintly in the dark. "You used to wait for him there too," she said quietly. Milo's ears twitched. "But you don't have to anymore." She knelt beside him, placing her hand gently over his chest. His heartbeat steady beneath her palm. "He made it home," she whispered. "He always did." Milo leaned forward slightly, then looked back at her. And in that small exchange, she felt it fully. Closure. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just settled. That night, 2 a.m. arrived again. Sarah stayed on the couch. No candle. No hallway light. Just the soft glow from the stove clock. Milo stirred at 1:59. But instead of walking immediately to the door, he remained where he was. He looked toward it briefly, then back at her. 2 o'clock. Silence. No howl. No movement. Just a long, slow exhale. Sarah didn't speak. She didn't question. She simply placed her hand gently on his back. "You kept your promise," she whispered. He shifted closer, resting fully against her side. No tension in his body. No unfinished ritual. Only peace. The moment passed like any other minute. Ordinary. Complete. The next few nights were the same. Sometimes he stood briefly at 2. Sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he let out a tiny hum of a sound. But never the long, aching note from before. The ritual had softened into memory. And memory had softened into love without urgency. One evening, Sarah sat with a notebook in her lap. She began writing small stories about her father. Not grand events. Just simple things. The way he always double-checked the front door lock. The way he left sticky notes on the fridge. The way he scratched Milo's ears absent-mindedly while reading the newspaper. Milo lay at her feet while she wrote, breathing evenly. Content. At 2 a.m., he didn't move at all. She glanced at the clock. Then back at him. He was asleep. Peaceful. As if something inside him had finally been set down. Sarah closed the notebook gently. Tears filled her eyes, but they were different tears now. Not from confusion. Not from ache. From gratitude. Because Milo hadn't just remembered for himself. He had reminded her. He had gently pulled her towards something she hadn't fully faced. The exact minute that once felt empty, now felt honored. And once it was honored, it no longer needed to echo. She leaned down and kissed the top of his head. "Thank you for waiting," she whispered. His tail thumped lazily once against the rug. Then he slept on. That night marked the turning point. Not because something dramatic happened, but because something quiet ended. The need to mark the minute. The need to hold the doorway. The need to repeat the sound. Loyalty had done its work. Memory had been acknowledged. Love had been spoken aloud. And now, it could rest. The house felt different now. Not quieter. Not louder. Just settled. Like a room after guests have gone home, still warm from conversation. Sarah noticed it most in the evenings. The space near the front door no longer carried weight. It was simply a doorway again. Wood. Glass. A handle that turned. Nothing more. And yet, it would always mean something. 3 nights passed without a single howl. At 2 a.m., Sarah found herself waking out of habit. Her eyes drifting toward the hallway. Her ears listening. But the house remained still. Milo slept at the foot of the couch. Breathing slow. Deep. Peaceful. On the 4th night, he stirred at 1:59. Just slightly. She watched carefully. 2 o'clock. He lifted his head. Looked toward the door. Held that gaze for a quiet second. Then, he lowered his head again. No sound. No movement. Just acceptance. Sarah felt tears rise gently in her eyes. Not from sadness. From understanding. The ritual had never been about calling someone back. It had never been about unfinished business. It had been about honoring a rhythm. A moment once filled with reunion. And now that the memory had been shared, it no longer needed repetition. The following afternoon, Sarah did something she hadn't done in a long time. She drove to the hospital. Not to go inside. Just to sit in the parking lot. Milo rode in the back seat, watching the passing streets through the window. When they arrived, she turned off the engine. The building stood tall and calm under the afternoon sun. Ordinary. Busy. Full of new stories unfolding inside. She looked at Milo through the rearview mirror. "You spent years waiting for him here," she said softly. Milo tilted his head slightly. "You always knew when it was time." She stepped out of the car and opened the back door. He jumped down gently. They stood together near the edge of the lot. A soft breeze moved through the trees. Cars came and went. Shift changes happening just like they always had. Sarah checked her phone. 1:58 p.m. Not 2 a.m. But still. A moment. She knelt beside Milo. "You were never waiting for the door," she said. "You were keeping track of love." His eyes met hers. Calm. Steady. She smiled through quiet tears. And love doesn't disappear when someone leaves. It changes shape. It changes sound. But it stays. That night, back home, she left the hallway completely dark. No candle. No photo placed near the door. Everything rested naturally where it belonged. At 2 a.m., Sarah remained asleep. For the first time since this began. No stirring. No listening. No anticipation. The house moved gently through the hour unnoticed. Morning arrived softly. Sunlight warmed the kitchen tiles. Milo stretched near the window. Normal. Light. Sarah woke feeling rested. Truly rested. She sat up slowly and glanced at the clock. 7:42 a.m. She smiled to herself. "It's okay," she whispered into the quiet room. Milo walked over and rested his chin on her lap. His eyes bright. present, not carrying the weight of midnight anymore. Later that day, as they walked through the neighborhood, a small boy from down the street waved at Milo. "Your dog's so calm," the boy's mother said kindly. Sarah smiled. "He's a good listener," she replied. And she meant it. Because Milo had listened to something invisible for weeks. Something only he could feel at first. And through patience, through repetition, through loyalty, he had gently invited her to listen too. The beautiful truth wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic in the way movies shout and swell. It was quiet. Simple. A dog remembered the exact minute someone he loved used to come home. He marked it faithfully. Night after night. Not because he was lost, but because he was devoted. And once that devotion was shared, once it was spoken and honored, it softened. It completed itself. That evening, Sarah sat on the couch with Milo beside her. The television played softly in the background. She absent-mindedly ran her fingers through his fur. "You gave me time to say goodbye properly," she whispered. Milo leaned slightly closer. "And you did it without words." He sighed contentedly. The clock ticked forward. 10 p.m. 11 p.m. Midnight. Time moved like it always does. Unafraid. Unstopped. And when 2 a.m. came, it passed like any other minute. Ordinary. Gentle. Whole. Sarah didn't wake. Milo didn't stir. The house remained wrapped in peaceful sleep. Because the truth had already done its work. And love, when fully remembered, doesn't need to echo anymore. Spring arrived quietly. Not in a dramatic rush, but in small changes. Longer evenings. Softer air. Light lingering just a little past dinner. The house felt open now. Windows cracked slightly during the day. Fresh breeze drifting through the hallway that once held so much midnight meaning. Sarah moved through her routines with ease. Coffee in the morning. Music while cooking. Phone calls with friends she hadn't spoken to in months. Life hadn't paused. It had simply needed a moment. And that moment had been 2 a.m. One evening, Sarah found herself standing near the front door again. Not out of habit. Just coincidence. She rested her hand lightly on the handle. The wood felt smooth beneath her palm. Familiar. But no longer heavy. Milo stood behind her. Quiet. Watching. "You don't have to guard this anymore," she said softly. He stepped forward and leaned gently against her leg. Not protective. Not alert. Just present. She smiled. "I think we're okay." That night, she went to bed earlier than usual. The windows were open just enough to let in the sound of crickets. The kind of peaceful noise that makes a house feel alive. Milo curled up on his bed near the foot of hers. Breathing steady. The clock moved toward midnight. Then 1 a.m. Then 1:59. But neither of them stirred. 2 o'clock came. And passed. Like any other minute in the world. No howl. No pause. Just time continuing its gentle march forward. The next morning, sunlight filled the bedroom. Warm and golden. Sarah stretched slowly. She didn't check the clock. She didn't think about the hour. She simply sat up and smiled. Milo lifted his head and thumped his tail once against the floor. "Good morning," she whispered. And it was. Truly. Later that week, Sarah invited her sister over for dinner. They hadn't talked deeply about their father in a while. Not because they didn't care, but because sometimes grief makes conversations quiet. As they sat at the table, laughter came easily. Stories surfaced naturally. Remember when he burned the toast every Sunday? Remember how he insisted on fixing everything himself? Milo lay beneath the table. Calm. Content. Listening. Not waiting. Sarah glanced at the clock on the stove. 1:58 a.m. Her sister was still there, helping dry dishes after staying later than planned. 2 o'clock came quietly. No sound from the hallway. No movement toward the door. Just the soft clink of plates being stacked. Sarah felt something warm settle in her chest. Not relief. Not even closure. Something deeper. Peace. She walked into the living room briefly. Just to look. Milo lay on his side. Sleeping. Dreaming perhaps. Free from the weight of marking a moment that no longer needed to be marked. She knelt beside him. Brushed a hand gently over his golden fur. "You can rest now," she whispered. His ear flicked slightly. But he didn't wake. That night, after her sister left, Sarah sat alone on the couch for a while. The house was still. Calm. Complete. She thought back to the first howl. The confusion. The quiet ache. The way the sound had filled the hallway like a question. Now she understood. It had never been a question. It had been a gift. A reminder to pause. To remember fully. To honor a moment that once meant everything. And once honored. It was free to become memory. Not ritual. Not obligation. Just love carried forward. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into a new season. The 2 a.m. hour blended back into the fabric of night. Ordinary again. But somehow, sacred too. Because Sarah would always know what once lived there. Not the sound of longing. But the sound of loyalty. Of a dog who remembered down to the minute. Who kept a promise long after others stopped counting time. One evening, as golden sunset filled the living room, Sarah sat beside Milo on the floor. She wrapped her arms gently around his neck. He leaned into her, warm and steady. "You taught me something," she said quietly. He blinked slowly. "You showed me that love doesn't disappear when someone leaves. It changes form. It changes rhythm. But it stays. Sometimes it waits at a door. Sometimes it whispers at 2 a.m. And sometimes it simply rests beside you." That night, Sarah turned off the lights without hesitation. No anticipation. No listening for sound. Just calm. As she drifted toward sleep, she felt Milo settle near her bed. The same place he'd always been. Loyal. Steady. Home. 2 a.m. arrived in the dark. Silent. Peaceful. Complete. And somewhere between seconds ticking forward. Sarah dreamed of her father walking through the front door one last time. Not tired. Not distant. Just smiling. Because everything that needed to be said had been said. Everything that needed to be remembered had been remembered. And everything that needed to rest finally rested. Milo didn't howl again. He didn't need to. The truth behind his actions had been more beautiful than anyone imagined. Not dramatic. Not extraordinary. Just a quiet devotion carried faithfully through time. And in that quiet devotion, Sarah found healing. Not because the past returned, but because it was honored. And love once honored becomes peace.